Two guys, two beers, two mics, one purpose. To deliver two opinions nobody asked for. Two opinions you never knew you needed until now. This is Scribbler to Scribe.
Welcome to another episode of Scribbler to Scribe. I'm your host, David Wishart, and I am joined by the one and only Ronnie Smith.
Tis I, in person.
That's right.
Season 2, baby.
Season 2, yeah. So episode, what do I call it, 1.5?
1.3?
Yeah, I don't know. We've had some technical difficulties more than once trying to get this thing going. So, a little bit back to the drawing board. I think we lost half of the last episode. So, I guess to start this week for our monk brew of the week, and we'll go through this first, and then I'll ask you how your week is. But I don't want anything to interrupt, between us and the beer.
Right.
So we are enjoying Chimay Blue, and the Chimay Blue is one of the beers from the Chimay Brewery, and that's in Scribe, Abbey, which is in an area called Chimay, Belgium. The brewery's not as old as the Rochefort Brewery, which we talked about last week. It was founded in 1862, so it's a little older than Canada. And what I learned about the Trappist beers is they're not for profit, so it's a non-profit. But Chimay itself sells over $50 million in beer sales every year, and the beer is used to support the monastery and the charitable causes that the monastery in turn supports itself. So, this podcast game is not the right racket. I guess we got to be brewing our own Peace Lutheran Church beer or something.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
You can have a bona fide pastor on staff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which is kind of like a monk almost, but
yeah, you're halfway there. You got like the monk hair, so you could do that.
I'm just gonna give up the rest of my life and we'll be good to go.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You need to wear like the brown sort of friar monk robes and everything all the time.
On the top of my head.
Yeah, you could do that. I've already got it here.
Oh yeah, there you go.
There, so we do that for you. I don't know if the monk gigs in my future, but
yeah, I got kids now, so can't really leave them.
Right. That's true.
And a wife too, I guess.
That as well.
Can't leave her either.
So we're going to enjoy this one. It's got a great color on it. I think Ronnie's pour was a little bit more pro than mine. Got a little ahead of myself.
I did work in a fine dining restaurant once upon a time.
Yeah, I did not. So I was a busboy at one, but that doesn't count. They wouldn't let me touch the beer because I was 17. So. But we'll enjoy this through the episode.
Yes, you may.
Yeah, so Chimay Blue.
Thank you very much for bringing these. That's the only reason I agreed to do this was for the free beer.
Yeah, well, that's the only reason I'm back for season 2, right? It's like, oh, there's an idea. Let's do that. That'll make it fun. But the thing is with these beers, though, is that they're so heavy, right? This one is 9%, I think.
Whew.
And you can't drink them all the time. So this is like a nice occasion to do that. It kind of makes it a little more fun and special rather than just, some random evening or whatever.
Right. Looking forward to rating this beer later on in the
yeah, exactly.
in the episode.
The interesting thing is there's some distance between this and like we're filming every 2 weeks, right? So, what forming a benchmark of comparison from what we had before and remembering that. But right now, like that first sip, I'm saying this is pretty close to that Rochefort 8 taste wise. Around the same percentages and everything too.
I've got an early number in my head, but I want to give it some time to percolate, make sure, and see where we go. It was nice to have that as a reference point, and may even need to revisit that at the end of the season to bring that one back to give it a fair shake against the other beers.
It's possible, yeah, because we need an excuse to revisit them.
Yeah, and there was nothing to compare it against, so I rated it quite high at 8.5.
Yeah.
But that may go up or down depending on how the rest of the season goes.
These scales are all relative, right?
Sure.
It's all subjective anyway. You can't really know. All right, enough about the beer. We'll come back to it a little later.
Yep.
Let's talk about our new digs.
Our new digs, yeah. Got the big board back here.
Yeah.
Invitation to all you artists out there to come on down and try your hand at the chalkboard, because I'm not very good, as you can see.
I personally think the likeness to me is actually pretty spot on.
Mine's easy enough to do. You just slap some curls on the top, and it's
right.
a reasonable facsimile.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a little bit of like a clown hair vibe going on there.
Yep, good old Ronnie McDonald over here.
There you go. We do need a logo, though. I'm more and more. I'm sitting here going, okay, we probably need to design something. I'd fiddle around with a couple ideas last year, and nothing really stuck. So
need to work on our quill game.
Quill game. There you go. Yeah. So that's a good name for a podcast. Quill game.
Yeah, it's a spin-off of Squid Game.
Yeah, there you go. Let's go back to the drawing board. Get rid of the Scribbler to Scribe name. Let's go with that. Quill game.
Squiddler to Scribe.
Yeah. Maybe that'll be the name of this episode, Quill game. I don't know how we'll fold that into anything later, but we'll see.
Any self-respecting podcast needs a logo. That's when you know you're serious.
Yeah, exactly. We got to up our game, right? So this chalkboard image is maybe not going to cut it, though it has a certain charm to it that maybe we can run with.
So again, all you artists out there, if you want to try your hand at branding our podcast, by all means, we'd love to see your submissions.
Yes. That's your way that's the way you can donate to the church, right? Get started. So, listen, I guess just to start, I want to know how's the last 2 weeks been? What have you been up to?
Last 2 weeks have been quite good. We've opened the church a few weeks ago, so every week that goes by, I get a little more comfortable with things. Learning the live stream was a big deal, and thanks to all the people there that were helping get that going. But week after week, it's starting to feel a bit more normal. I think all of us are really at that point where we're longing for a little bit of normalcy. Mm-hmm. And, there's no going back to what we were before, of course. But little things like going to church, taking your kids out for Halloween, talking to some parents of your kids' friends and things like that. Just feeling a bit more human the past couple of weeks. So those are kind of the highlights for me, I would say.
How much Halloween candy have you put back so far?
Well, that's the downside, I guess.
Yeah.
Definitely more than I should have. In fact, I made a point to throw out the rest of it there today.
Really?
Yeah. We're getting out of hand. It's day 5?
Yeah.
Of just nonstop candy. Kids are bouncing off the walls.
Right.
So are Hila and I.
So if you had to rate what your favorite Halloween candy is, give me your top 3. The ones you regret most throwing in the garbage.
Well, we ate all the good ones, so
okay.
For me it's the little chocolate bars, I guess.
Yeah.
Generally any of them are good. Though I would probably say Wonder Bar is my favorite.
Good choice. I was gonna say that's my favorite too. So
hey,
there you go.
On the right track.
Yeah. We were destined for each other here, right?
That's it. Now we know.
We'll just come next week. We'll have Wonder Bars.
Yeah.
Any others?
How about you?
Well, Wonder Bar's at the top. If I had to pick 2 more, I was ranking them the other day after Halloween night because I decided that I was going to eat one of everything and then rank them all.
Yeah.
So that was a mistake because there's a lot of everything there. But I think my top 3 was Wonder Bar was at number 1. I enjoy Snickers too.
You don't get too many of those.
No, they're not that often, but the Snickers is a good bar.
Yeah.
And I actually like the Swedish Fish quite a bit.
Those are quite good, yeah.
Yeah, they're a little actually better than, well, at least the package that I had that night was better than the Swedish berries. But I like the candies as well. My wife's not a fan. She's totally on the chocolate train. But
yeah.
for me, I do a little everything. And Bentley, our son, honestly, like not that interested in the candy. So we get I eat way more than he does.
That's good.
So it's like he's super excited the night of, that's a huge deal. But then afterwards, like that wanes pretty fast. It's like the gathering of the candy is the fun part, but the eating of the candy is kind of like he's finished the Starburst. Those are gone now, and I'm just not that interested anymore.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. So
my top ones would definitely all be chocolate bars, though. You slap a little Kit Kat in there, some Aero. The Snickers is great.
Yeah.
Even Coffee Crisp, I've been appreciating that more.
Yeah.
In recent years, it was kind of the last one that you wouldn't eat. You'd eat everything else first.
Yeah. And
then you'd have nothing but Coffee Crisps left.
Right.
But I found myself kind of going for those a little more upfront.
Yeah.
This year.
It's because you're an old man now.
I guess. Well, I drink coffee now.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly. You're a kid. You're like, what the heck is this crap?
Yeah.
When I was eating it all, I was like, what was at the very bottom? The one that I enjoyed the least. Escaping me now. Smarties and stuff like that. I kind of like, it's just doesn't really do that much for me.
Yeah, I'll go with those over a lot of the candies. As far as the candy goes, the Swedish Fish are good, the berries are good. But even then, I'm not too gung-ho about candy per se.
All right.
So I would still rate it Smarties above most candies.
All right. Agree to disagree then.
Yep, another subjective venture here.
Right, exactly. All right. Well,
but what about you? How's your last 2 weeks?
Other than Halloween, we at work we finished our financial year October 31st. It was harrowing for that last little bit of trying to get everything done, but got some big project milestones to the finish line. So that was a big deal.
Satisfying, perhaps?
With work, often things never feel done. So when you get like a big project like that finally finished, it's pretty satisfying. Though I will admit that, here we are in the first week of November, we're already just right back at it. Like there was not much of a lull. Right. But I am taking a few days off next week.
Nice.
Gonna go Niagara Falls and just hang out there for a couple nights, got a hotel, just to get away. I'm definitely feeling the need for some vacation. That's for sure. This time of year, I find it starts to feel long because you're getting a little like far away from your summer vacation. It's a busy time for work. You're not quite there at the Christmas break or anything yet. So it's a bit of a lull here that can be tough. So I find we usually take vacation for a few days there in mid-November just to break it up. So that's been the big thing. I guess the only other thing that's noteworthy, working out a ton. So
I thought I noticed.
Yeah, exactly. We decided when we closed up our cottage, and all the copious amounts of cheese that seem to get eaten every weekend at the cottage, that it would be time to kind of get back at the workout. So I'm doing a program for 7 days a week, basically for 3 weeks.
The Halloween candy workout.
Yeah, exactly. That's really undoing some of the progress that I made. So, but maybe on the flip side, it's allowed me to eat more than my fair share. I don't know. Anyway, so that's going on. Nothing too exciting, but
congrats on the end of the project, and it'd be great for you guys to get away and have some family time.
Yeah, for sure.
Well earned, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, that'll be for my boss to judge. All right. So now we get into our regularly scheduled programming. So first up is, can you give us a quick rundown of the reading from this week?
Gospel of John 8:31 to 36. It's a short reading. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you're truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." They answered him, We are descendants of Abraham and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you'll be made free? Jesus answered them, very truly I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The son has a place there forever. So if the son makes you free, you will be free indeed. So in our church, anyways, we celebrate Reformation Sunday on October 31st. Or the Sunday that's closest to it. So it's all about renewing our call to continue to reform the church. We are a church reformed, ever being reformed. In the past, that's really meant how do we take what we have and tweak it so it's better, kind of thing. But this year was different because of COVID. Situation is much different. It really feels like we need to sort of rebuild. So reform as in reforming something that's kind of been, fallen apart a little bit. Even though, a lot of people have tried really hard to keep it together online, there's just a fracturing that has happened because we haven't been seeing each other. We haven't been gathering in the same place. And before we can, innovate, reform in an innovative way, we need to sort of get back together again. And, and the past few weeks have been really nice for that, very therapeutic. But then there's another thing in the reading here that relates to that. So the disciples are saying, we're descendants of Abraham. We've never been slave to anyone. So they too have sort of forgotten who they were, as we've sort of kind of forgotten who we are in all this COVID. Our identity has shifted so much. So much about being a Christian is gathering together. Jesus says, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, I am there also. And it's hard to get that feeling when you're just locked in your basement, on Zoom or writing or working on the videos and these sorts of things. So felt like we've been kind of starting to forget who we are. And much like the disciples. So I pointed that out. They'd forgotten that they were slaves in Israel. They'd forgotten about the time in the wilderness. They'd forgotten about the oppression of the Romans. And I'm sure they knew that in lived experience, but I think you get the point. It's sort of, what do you mean we've never been slaves? Or we've never been slaves to anyone? And so what happens to your ancestors happens to you. What happens to you happens to your ancestors, and so on. This never-ending chain of humanity, essentially. And so just kind of making points on that and inviting us to sort of, remember who we are a little bit, and let's try to reform this church as we open up, as we start to increase capacity and these sorts of things. It's been a good long time. And, we did the best that we could with what we had, but there's just something about sitting in person, looking the other person in the eye that you just don't get from a screen, I guess.
So would you say that you felt, through this sort of virtual period, kind of formless?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, which I really embraced for the longest time, because just being a creative person, I was getting to create so much all the time, learning new things. It was really stressful and it was a ton of work, but I was pretty passionate about it. And so that was driving me. And then people also needed things to do and everything was locked up too. So learning the technology was a great way to try to keep people together, whether that was with the music video projects that we did with the music team, or coffee hour on Sunday morning after the video was released to the public, Bible studies, confirmation class, meetings, all that kind of stuff, education events. We really threw ourselves into that, and we learned a lot, and we've got a lot of great skills now that we didn't have before. But eventually you kind of get burnt out, if you're just constantly creating. And if you look at any songwriters or authors or people who are in the creative business, eventually they all go through dry spells.
Yeah.
Sometimes you go through a really productive period and then it just dries up and you need to rest and sort of get away from it to sort of recharge the batteries. Really been feeling that way sort of late, but being open the past few weeks has sort of been very therapeutic that way.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned that you felt, these periods of being alone in the basement, sort of creating after a while, start to feel more thankless. Maybe because you aren't sharing the fruits of that labor kind of with your community at the same time. And, one of the things, you can go and create many things all you want, but if there's no one to share it with, it loses some of its potency. Like it's not the reward of that effort is not the same.
Absolutely.
And there is something, when I was a kid, I used to run track and field. So I was, grade 7, my name was in the newspaper for winning many races, the 100, 200, and 400 meter race that year.
Nice.
And I did well in the next year as well, like in grade 8, but I was only 12, 13 years old at the time, right? And so that was looking pretty promising. And if I wanted to pursue that, could have gone quite far with it. Canada Games or whatever. I think that probably could have happened if I had the passion for it. But the problem with a sport like track and field is it's very solitary. Mm-hmm. You win or lose alone. There's no team aspect to it. And I found that to be the part that kept it from being for me feeling as passionate about it. I went and played more soccer and basketball and stuff like that instead. Mm-hmm. And there was that team aspect. And as somebody who I find identify more as an introvert or whatever, but I do just enjoy the company of other people, but more like in smaller groups generally. Like I like this kind of a setting where you can have like a proper conversation. A lot of times you get in like really big group settings. It's another story, and you feel a little bit lost in the crowd kind of thing. But
mm-hmm. Divided attention, I guess.
Yeah, but yeah, I get that of feeling kind of isolated from everything and doing it all by yourself. And for a while, it's like sometimes you need that because you just had too much of other people, and you need to recharge the batteries a different way. But yeah, I think that COVID has kind of really stretched us in one direction. The pendulum swung really far in that one way. So it's nice to see that it's starting to come back. Mm-hmm. And one of the other things that mentioned in that reading is that saying if 2 or 3 are gathered, Jesus is there. Can you talk about that more? That really resonated with me because the counterpoint I want to say to that is, well, does that mean that if you're alone that Jesus is not there? Or is it what is it trying to say? What does that mean?
Yeah, I think, if we think about love God, love your neighbor as yourself, you kind of, in order to do that, you need that other piece. Like you said, like if, winning and losing alone, or not sharing in the labor, I guess. Sharing our life is what makes many things so fulfilling. Mm-hmm. So these music videos, for example, lots of people would send in their videos, and I'm looking at lots of different people, and lots of people are gathering around a project, but at the end of the day, it's just me by myself in the basement putting it all together. And so that was really great for a while, but then eventually I was finding it kind of empty, a bit of an empty experience. And so in the coming back together now and sharing it in a church service, for example, where the people who were participating in the video are also in the room, it's just a lot more rewarding. And there's this, I guess our energy has a sort of outlet to pour into, I guess, in some kind of way. But I think in the context of that quote, Jesus is kind of trying to say, take heart, have courage. Whenever you guys are feeling down, just remember that I'm there, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But also, you can get too deep in your own head sometimes. And I was finding that was certainly happening with me. I was starting to create this sort of alternate universe, I guess, that only I lived in.
Yeah.
And Not a good feeling, I suppose. Eventually, you need some sort of connection, some connectivity, and the best way to do that is gathering with others. So this allows it uplifts our spirits, gives our energy sort of a destination, if you will, rather than just sort of being stymied and not having anywhere to flow into.
Kind of forces you to stop thinking about yourself too. When you're in a community, you start thinking about others. And it's funny. A memory on Facebook came up for me. It was just something I wrote about like a year ago, and I don't think about when I wrote this a year ago. The podcast hadn't even started yet. But what it was is, you as a person are the average of the 5 people you interact with the most. And so the idea is, okay, who do you surround yourself with most often? And depending on who those types of people are, that's going to sort of define your reality as a person. And you're going to be very influenced by those people. So you can think of, who am I, closest to at any given point in my life, and that'll change over time, of course. But and one, the obvious conclusion that you can draw from that is, well, then surround yourself with, good, charitable, nice, non-toxic people, and your life will be better. But if you surround yourself with toxicity, of course, your average experience is going to deteriorate. Now, but I thought about it, and I'm like, well, actually, you can take this in a different direction, and you say, well, don't think about it from your own perspective and the people you surround yourself with, but look at it from the perspective that you are inside of one person's group of 5. And so if that person is the average of, the 5 people they deal with, well, the better things that you do and the more that you improve yourself and create a better environment in the world and give more to the world around you, you are lifting that other person up, whether directly or indirectly, through improving that and giving them a better average, to work with. So, and I do really, like, I'm partial to this idea that, Jesus and God are like this embodiment of like love and community. And like, that's really what they mean, is that when we find God, when we find ourselves connected to other people, in like a loving way. And when you give of yourself, that's when you feel like at your absolute best, right? And so, and some crisis can be happening and that kind of thing, but when you give, I think it does definitely create just a better environment, around you, and I just really lifts you up. So when you get stuck in those moments of being in the basement all alone, like, it can be the opposite, really like detract from that.
Yeah, it's like it sort of stops your energy flow, I guess would be a sort of a corny way to say it, but we all need something that's greater than ourselves to sort of live into, or live up to, or however you want to say that. And Jesus is saying this to the disciples because he's not going to be around for very long. And it's going to be a tough road for them. And so, don't just hole up and go hide somewhere, like stick together kind of message there. And of course, God, there's nowhere God cannot be. It's nowhere the Holy Spirit cannot find you, I guess, in a sense. But that's sort of a bit more of the context around when he makes a comment like that. Right. But, I think COVID has been an epidemic of isolation and loneliness as well. And even, the most resilient among us, I guess we're feeling that somewhere down the road. For sure. And I guess that was just me sort of trying to confess, what I was experiencing, in the hopes that other people feel like, okay, well, now I can sort of step into that too and say how I've been feeling. one of the sort of tasks, I guess, of being a pastor, I guess, is sometimes you have to be the one to go first, to be vulnerable first, to say what's you're struggling with. So then that creates a whole lot of room for other people to then step into that space. You're creating space, safe space for people.
Yeah, I mean that is an interesting point, because I think, I mean, it's my opinion, that in many traditional, you know, minister, pastor, priest roles, that fallibility isn't put on display in any way, right? Because you're kind of like a representative of God, and so you're supposed to be, you know, the purest of the pure on earth, and to admit that you've got struggles and issues and whatnot, is something that, you know, you probably should put it out in the open. You'd be more relatable, rather than kind of just being theological with the whole thing. So I mean, I think that's good. You know, I remember, you know, as a kid and hearing stories like, you know, one of the priests of our church had a drinking problem, right? You would never know from, you know, when he was up in front, at least I could never tell, right? Or at least he didn't have a drinking problem Sunday mornings, but like
that 1 hour,
yeah.
Who knows? Maybe he was drinking before the service and was sort of just in that
could have been
right spot at the right time.
Yeah, hey, who knows? And the thing is, it's a shame that in the church community of all communities, that you couldn't reveal that of yourself and be welcomed into a non-judgmental space where they would be supportive and open to listening. I don't think traditionally that the church has been very good about that.
Right. A lot of mask wearing in the church.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, you say mask wearing, like, they wearing face masks back then? No, okay, yeah. Taking you too literally.
He's here all week, folks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so you've got to go to a place like an AA or something for that kind of situation, rather than feeling like your church community is a place that you can turn. And I feel that there's such a vacuum in the world right now for those types of communities that people can turn to. And it's a shame, in my opinion, that the church hasn't been that way or isn't seen in that light. Where you're a person who's fallible and struggling and has problems and stuff, that you couldn't come and open up. And so, you know, I mean, I think this something good about this podcast, right, is we can talk about stuff that we're struggling with and hopefully open those doors and let people know at least Peace Lutheran Church and places is one of those spots where, you know, you wouldn't, you don't feel judged. And, you know, what's interesting, again, is after we finished the podcast last week, right, the woman outside was talking to you, and, you know, she had a curiosity about things, but felt like, oh, I'm not good enough for the church because I've got, you know, my problems, and so I'm not clean enough or pure enough to be part of it. Like, that's the vibe I got from the sense that she was, you know, giving off of why she didn't join it. That's a reputation that the church has got to shed if it hasn't.
Yeah, certainly. For too long, you know, we've sort of been very judgmental towards each other, I guess. And I'm not always the best for saying what's bothering me, and sometimes I don't even know what's bothering me either. Not that I'm some awesome person or whatever, but in this case, and, you know, reflecting on Sunday's sermon, I'm pretty an open book in general. I mean, if something's bothering me, I will say. I'm not afraid to say. But, you know, the institution that's been built up around the church, I guess, is very firm, rigid, hierarchical, a lot of power structures involved. And Jesus came to tear down a lot of that stuff. I mean, here's a guy who's just, leading in vulnerability. I mean, he's got no possessions that we can tell.
Mm-hmm.
Just going around trying to help people as best he could, trying to preach the word, preach the gospel, that God has come close. Doing whatever he could to help those around him. He's eating with the sinners. The religious elite are always picking on him, like, why are you doing that? They're always trying to trap him. But he's going to the places that make people uncomfortable, and the gospel calls us into places that makes us uncomfortable. And if you're too comfortable, you're not doing it right, I guess.
Well, there's so many situations where, we've talked about this before. There's a spot where you can do something good for someone, but it kind of puts you in somewhat in uncomfortable position.
Right.
And so you have to lean into that a little and be willing to be uncomfortable, but you can probably do great things if you do. We're coming up on time here, so I think we need to move on to the next topic. But before we leave this, I just want to point out one last thing, because we are a Lutheran church. So this is 504 years since Martin Luther's 95 Theses.
Mm-hmm.
So do you know what the number one thesis is on that list?
It's very wordy, so don't expect me to quote it.
Okay.
But in general, the 95 Theses are statements that he made speaking against the way the church was at that time.
Mm-hmm.
The number one issue was there were people going around, quote unquote, representing the church, selling indulgences, which was basically, at that time, the church preached that when you died, you went to purgatory, which is sort of this in-between place. You're not in heaven, you're not in hell, and anything could happen when you get there. But if you pay money and buy this piece of paper, your dead dad will go to heaven, or you can buy your own salvation, basically, buy your way to heaven. And he was very pissed off about that, rightfully so, I think.
Yeah.
And so quite a good many of them are about that, rejecting the sale of indulgences. But very closely tied to that too then is what we, in fancy church terms, say justification by grace, which means that, well, I guess at that time it was like, your salvation can be purchased by good deeds or giving money to the church or buying these indulgences. It was all about what you did or didn't do determined whether you'd get into heaven or not.
Mm-hmm.
So Luther, in his intense study of Scripture, realized that it's not what we do, it's what God does. So we're saved by God's grace.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially. And so those two things, rejecting the sale of indulgences and putting forward this justification by works, are the sort of the meat and potatoes of the Reformation, essentially.
Okay.
And then later on, you get things like, priests should be able to marry and things like that to sort of get away from like sex abuse scandals and things like that. And we could say more, but those are some of the greatest hits, I guess, of the Reformation.
Right.
Education for boys and girls was a big one. The modern day education system is very much linked to the Reformation. So if you like your schools, if you like your daughters being educated, you can thank Martin Luther, I guess.
Right. So this guy up here on our beer board, right? Martin Luther approved.
And of course, Jesus was the first really huge feminist, I guess we could say.
Sure.
He was always lifting up the people that were lowest on the totem pole in that society: children, women, beggars, sinners, people who are blind, things like that.
Right. Okay, I mean, that's good. It's a good history lesson, I guess. It's, over 500 years later. So it's it's good to see the church is still going, strong. And I hope that we're this idea of Reformation is a good one to just keep you check yourself. It's that idea that it's reformed over being reformed is important because it's not done, and
and we get to participate in it. That's the important thing, because for centuries the church was something that was fed to you in a certain package, and there's only one way to do it, and you had to do it their way, and that was it, or you paid the price. But this allows each of us in every successive generation to just participate in the faith process, I guess. We make observations, we see things, we have preferences, we get opinions. Let's bring that all together and talk about it as a community, and let that help us move forward.
So,
one last thing. I'd be remiss in saying he also translated the Bible into the common language so that regular Joe Schmoes like us could actually read this thing.
Oh, that's a big deal, yeah.
And the process of learning to read the Bible is really the big thrust behind the education that he was on about, but now it's led to all these other things centuries later. But till then, the services were in Latin, so all the people would come in, somebody speaking a foreign language, got their back to you half the time, they're having a meal up there on their own, and you're just like, just sitting there basically. So imagine, we take it for granted now that we can actually crack this book open and see what it says. Sadly, on the other hand, now that we've had this luxury, most people don't really take advantage of it.
We've talked about Martin Luther, 504 years. We got to move on to the next section of our show, though. And for this, it's of course spiritual news. So in the news, again, last week we had technical difficulties. This whole section of the talk we lost.
All you podcasters out there, you know what we're talking about. Yeah, it's happened to you too, I'm sure.
Yeah, so that's unfortunate, but we're going to have a second try at this topic. Maybe with little changes from what we discussed before, but
it's even more appropriate now.
All right, well, tell me why. What are we talking about? Why is it more apropos?
So we were talking about vaccination mandates. We saw like the Leafs and the Raptors and the Blue Jays, they were having like tens of thousands of people in their stadiums, and our little church on the corner was closed for a really long time, and we're like, well, we got to start catching up here. It seemed like they were going kind of all of a sudden it seemed like everything was opening up rather quickly, almost too fast, too soon. But the difference there was they could open up because they required proof of vaccination. And there's been a lot of sort of controversy over that, particularly down in the States, but even here in Canada too. A lot of people were citing religious purposes why they couldn't get a vaccine, which by and large is mostly BS. A very, very rare instance would you find something like that. But our church now, just in this past week, our council voted to open up our church to full capacity, providing people show proof of vaccine. We didn't have to do that per se. We could have kept going on the way we were, but we felt very strongly that it was the right thing to do. And, love your neighbor as yourself. This is a way to protect the person beside you by making sure you get that. Of course, not everyone is physically able to do that, and there's some exemptions in place for that. But by and large, most people should be able to get on board with a policy like that.
Well, and you also offer the live stream option as well, so there's still other ways that people can.
Right, if you aren't comfortable coming out for whatever reason, you can still participate online at the same time that we're gathered.
Yeah. Well, the last discussion we had, let's revisit this, but we talked about this idea of religious exemptions. So in the Lutheran religion, is there any evidence or anything that anyone said about that in particular in the past?
Yeah, everything points to get the gosh darn vaccine, people.
Okay. Why do you say that?
So Martin Luther was around during the Black Plague in Europe, which, as everyone knows, decimated like half the population. And he's got I don't have it written here, I'll just paraphrase, but basically he's got a sort of tract that speaks on this, and it's basically, you know, I don't go out unless I have to go out. I don't go where people are unless I have to. Not for fear of myself, but for fear that I might infect them with something and then could never forgive myself or something like that. You know, I take medicine when I need to take medicine. I administer medicine when I need to administer medicine. So it's all about this, you know, the greater good is more important than my personal self-interest. But my big question to anti-vaxxers and what have you is like, what do you get out of this? What's your objective? What's your goal? What makes you want to be so against it? You know, what do you get, and who does that serve? Is it serving your own selfishness? I would argue generally it is what we've seen.
Well, so I'll play, you know, devil's advocate here.
Someone's got it.
Yeah. So just, you know, take the other side. So, it's, you know, I think with a lot of people, their own discomfort with vaccine mandates. I actually find the vaccine mandates kind of uncomfortable myself. Now, I understand why they exist, and they do make me feel safer. Like I was at a Leafs game recently, so my work gave me a ticket to go. And that was a weird experience. Like that was the first time I went to downtown Toronto in a year and a half.
Right.
And there's just so many people there. And it's like, what is this world that I've come back to? Mm-hmm. But because of, you know, vaccine mandates, you're like, oh, I can kind of get behind this, you know, whereas before it would have, you know, felt very different.
Well, you wouldn't have been able to go to the game had there not been a mandate in place.
Well, exactly. But that said, there is like an authority thing happening here. And I think some people have this discomfort with authority in general. I would say that a lot of people who have this like maybe unreasonable levels of skepticism of authority have probably experienced some level of like abuse or something like that in their past life from a figure who was like an authority figure who should have been a trusted figure in their life who wasn't. That's and fair. Betrayed them.
Generally, that's a personal relationship, though.
Yeah, probably is, but it extends to all authority figures.
Sure.
But even then, you know, we're saying, okay, people who are vaccinated can do X and people who are unvaccinated cannot. And if you replace vaccination with people of one particular religious affiliation can do X and people who are not cannot partake in that same thing, or people of a certain skin color can't you know, ride at the front of the bus or whatever, like, you know, people would have made justifications for why that was okay at the time.
Sure.
So now the circumstances here are very different.
Right.
You know, it is a public health crisis. And
public health crisis, exactly. It's not a personal individual freedom crisis.
Yes. So I agree with that. Like I get it, right? And I think it makes sense. Now, we can't know that the vaccines are totally safe because we only have a short sample period, right? Maybe they become something issue 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road, or who knows, right?
Well, but at least we all died together, I guess.
Yeah. And well, the thing is You could make that argument about a lot of stuff, though, right? That sure, it might have some adverse effect at some point in time, but it has more measurable, immediate benefits right now. So,
and it's been intensely studied by, you know, arguably the world's best scientists have all sort of come together on this. And I don't know about you, but when I couldn't go to school at all as a kid until I had this shot and that shot and this shot and that shot. So this to me is just like the next in the list of the vaccines that we've all already had to take. You can't send your kids to school if they hadn't had, you know, measles and smallpox and all those shots.
Yeah, and you know, I think the difference between that and this is since
we weren't around when those were serious issues.
Partly, yes. There's a generational memory that's lost over time, right? So, I mean, how many of the people who are anti-vax actually went through the polio epidemic or pandemic, you know, back in the 50s, right?
Right.
Very few. So, and the people who did live through that period of time, one, are probably more likely to get vaccinated, or they're in more vulnerable health status now, and so they feel more of a need to anyway. But I think that in the 2008 financial crisis is still an issue that the world hasn't really completely come to terms with. The reason I say that is what that crisis did is it created a very reasonable, in some circumstances, skepticism of experts. So there was a lot of, you know, experts who, you know, said things like houses can never fall in value and all this kind of stuff, right? And it led to a huge bubble that burst, and so many people's life savings were completely lost. And it seems like since that period of time, and it could be correlated to the rise of social media, and so it could be coincidental. Maybe it has nothing to do with the financial crisis, and it's purely that there's all these new, you know, a new school of YouTube and social media experts saying whatever nonsense on there, and somehow being treated as equally valid as someone who has a PhD in you know, biochemistry or something like that. But you can't even say anymore that, oh, well, all of the leading scientific experts were at the table to develop this vaccine and can, you know, assure that it's safe. You say, well, it doesn't matter what anybody's background is, how much schooling they've done, everything. It's all useless. It means nothing. It's like this weird post-truth world. And
post-truth.
And so
I think you're right in that it's a movement that's sort of risen over time, and maybe that was a touchstone moment for that kind of thinking.
Yep.
But a lot of it is just sort of discontent with one's own self in some kind of way, and you need an outlet to express your frustration, and it's easy to attack something that's so far away from you.
Yeah.
Maybe people feel safe in that, but in doing so, you're undermining the people next to you in some kind of way. You're putting your own sort of selfishness ahead of the greater good in some kind of way. And I don't trust Wall Street any more than I did, you know, in 2007. I mean, we all know those guys are sharks. They're all out for themselves. They're going to steal everything one day. They're going to wait till valuation goes up across the board. Then they're just going to swoop all the chips, and everyone else is screwed. So yeah, absolutely some distrust of experts there. But this is
as a guy who works in banking, I'm feeling a little attacked right now.
Well, what happened in the States? Is that not sort of what happened?
No,
did the very few elite people just sort of take everything, and everybody else got?
Well, yeah, there's definitely a lack of accountability for what happened. I mean, like
let me clarify too. Our banking industry is the envy of the world here in Canada. It's a different scenario, but the U.S. drives the world economy, basically. What they did down there was just so flagrant. We were insulated from a lot of the worst of it because we had a solid system here in Canada. So I didn't mean to make this
I'm messing with you.
Must be the Chimay talking.
Yeah, exactly. We're 9% deep, right? You gotta make you feel a little uncomfortable. No, like, you know, when these things, like, Canada is not immune from bad behavior in these spaces too. Like, I think that Canada generally, as a country, is more conservative in the right kind of ways. You know, the small c conservatism of just like not going out trying to like be crazy aggressive and screw everything over, you know, for your own good. I think we do think about one another a lot more. And as much as there may be people in Canada who are anti-vax or not willing to get vaccinated, you can see all these people who are, you know, putting on leave now in Canada because they're not complying with vaccine mandates, right?
Some backtracking on that this week.
There is, yeah, and that's kind of interesting too. But in general, I think Canada is still, like, you know, one of the top countries in this, which is, I think, it is good. And you know, you take the banking example, you know, as well, and you know, we're one of the leaders in terms of, you know, strong, safe, you know, financial institutions. We have a better respect for regulation and whatnot. It doesn't mean that we're immune to it. I mean, there's been situations of like sales practices and stuff that have been pretty predatory. And
absolutely. And how do you explain record profits during COVID when everybody else was hit so hard?
Well, it's complicated. There's lots going on to that. You know, in terms of just
they know how to cross the T's and dot the I's. That's
sure
how
they do.
They know how to make sure that they're covered in every scenario. Whereas we were just willing to just go along with things, and that happens.
I mean, I think the thing that was frustrating in any place that, you know, say where you work, right, is when you see some of that, the bad actors and that stuff happening, you're like seriously, like, come on. Because if you're believe that you work in this type of institution and then you have stuff happening and you're like, wait, what kind of institution do I work in? You're allowing this kind of garbage to go on here? I'm doing all this hard work over here and then these people are doing this crap over here. That can be really frustrating, you know, as somebody. And, you know, as somebody who works in the financial, you know, industry in Canada, like I'm you know, proud of the company that I work for. And, you know, I think by and large, we do a lot of great things and sometimes get a bad reputation, but in general, you know, you look at where we're at in the world and stuff and where Canada is with a lot of things in the world, like it's all consistent, I guess, with the Canadian model. But we're kind of getting off topic here, but
all right, let's bring it back to this vax and then we can move on here. But I've always been someone who's been skeptical of the flu shot, for example.
Yeah.
They never know which strain it's going to be. It's like only 50%. Like, it's a crapshoot, basically. And I haven't gotten that shot. When it first came out, I got it once, and then I got sick. And then a couple of years ago, my wife really wanted to get it, so we got it again. And guess what? We got sick. So I have no faith in the flu shot.
Mm-hmm.
But this COVID shot is like over 90%.
Mm-hmm.
And I do have faith in that. So I'm not anti-vaxxer, but I was very against the flu shot. Still am. I still don't believe in the flu shot.
States are different too, right? You know, the flu, for yourself at your age and stuff, you're gonna feel crummy for a few days versus how far down that hole, you know, you could go with COVID, right? So it is a little different there. I mean, although mind you, you know, if the flu shot helps protect other people around you, I guess there's some value to it.
But they can't even say that with any kind of confidence.
Yeah.
healthcare workers have to take the flu shot. How come they're not walking off the job over that when they know that it's not as efficacious as this COVID shot appears to be? And that's when politics gets involved, I guess, and people do weird things when politics is involved.
Yeah, and I think some of it is just fear of the novelty of it.
It's a shorter term than the process. Typically, that process would allow for. Sometimes they say, it could take up to 10 years to produce a vaccine. But thanks to some Canadian technology, I guess, even I heard that on Quirks and Quarks, there was some Canadian technology that allowed them to isolate. And I'm not a scientist, I don't know, but they're able to target it specifically enough that they could guarantee this really high percentage of effectiveness.
Well, I think that there was a lot of research post-SARS that happened that is the foundational work towards the mRNA vaccine technology, and so that this was all long in the making, and that it's just it was done rapidly, mainly because it was just you isolated the information of the virus and then figured out how to calibrate a vaccine to target it, but the technology behind it is not brand new.
It was new to us at the time, because all of a sudden one day the world shut down.
Yep.
And they don't shut the world down over the flu. This was one of the things that bothered me when I hear people saying, "Oh yeah, it's just a flu." Yeah. Well, people aren't dying like this in the millions because of the average flu.
Yeah, it's all just a government conspiracy covering up. It's not actually real,
Yeah, and you know what? To get every government in the world to agree on something is very unlikely.
Oh,
look at how they're handling climate change.
Yeah.
To think it's some big, Illuminati thing or whatever, that everyone's out to get us. Some people just go through their life, and it's really sad, but they go through their life thinking everybody's out to get them.
Yeah, and
now they have social media.
Yeah, so this comes back to what I said, about people who probably experienced some kind of betrayal from some authority figure at some point in their life that's caused them to believe that kind of a thing, where everybody's out to get them because they struggle to trust, right?
We're talking about people that went to a hospital to protest. Protesting nurses and doctors, the ones who are actually saving their ass in the end, pardon my language. But how do you get out of bed and do something like that?
Just certain level of just cynicism, I guess, the world where
they want to say, "Oh, it's my choice." Well, you do have a choice. You can stay home and not go to the Leaf game. Mm-hmm. You can stay home, not go to church. You can stay home, not go to the restaurant.
Well, here is something that I've thought about. Making a meme, because memes are these types of things that they boil everything down to something that's oversimplified.
It's the new scripture.
I can't stand them because they drive me crazy. Political memes are the worst.
Yeah.
But if you want to play into that game, so this idea that I had on this topic, when you talk about protesting in front of hospitals, you say, okay, you can frame this issue two ways, and they're both right. So you have a picture of people, and they're the flower children of the 60s, hippies and 70s, I guess, protesting Vietnam, and they're putting flowers in soldiers' rifles and stuff. What you can say is, so the soldiers your frontline workers, right? Just like healthcare workers. And you would say in the meme, you'd have a picture of that, then you'd have a picture of people protesting in front of the hospital. And you say, well, if you're not okay with this, and the people putting flowers and the guns and protesting right in front of your soldiers, then why are you okay with this, right? Of people protesting in front of a hospital.
It's what they call a false dichotomy.
So, but
classic rhetorical device.
Yeah. So you could frame it that way, but you could frame it the flip side, and you could say, because that's the way of sort of attacking the more right-wing view, right? Is to put the meme out in that structure.
Right.
But if you want to attack it the other way, you could say, if you're okay with this and protesting soldiers, then you need to be okay with this and protesting healthcare workers, right, in front of the hospitals.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you're like, well, what's right and what's wrong here? But that the problem is, you take it in meme form and you boil a very complex issue down into some simple soundbite and make it seem like, yeah, right? You know, like kind of just rah-rahs about it, and it's like,
yeah,
this isn't right.
And the other funny thing about this is like, the do your own research crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm sorry, but listening to Joe Rogan is not doing research on COVID vaccines. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, that's.
As someone who has done a lot of research in the humanities, not in science, they're very strict about what sources are you using. You can't use Wikipedia, for example, as a source, because anybody can go in there and change what's on there. That's not a bona fide, peer-reviewed source. You got the Kyrie Irvings of the world saying they're doing their own research. Are they testing COVID in labs and seeing analyzing behavior against this vaccine and that and the other thing? No, they're not doing that. They're just all like talking in a circle, sharing memes.
Yeah,
these crazy conspiracy theories.
Yeah, big confirmation bias.
Man, this is a good beer.
It is a good one. Yeah, I know. We've been going on for my camera's an hour and 10 minutes now, so we got
to trim this.
We got to wrap this up.
Yeah,
so,
let's do it.
Well, listen. All right, let's. It's a politically charged topic, but we got to rate the beers now. We're at the end of our show. It's time to rate the beers. So, Ronnie, you're first.
Okay.
What are we rating the Chimay Blue?
So, holding this up in the light, you get a better sense of the color. I'd say that's like a deep amber, almost a brown. I guess it was more brown when it was fuller.
Yeah.
It's just a hair over the darkness that I ideally like. I'm about a 6 on the. I'm like a copper guy.
Okay.
That's my sweet spot.
Yeah. Still
very delicious, especially for a 9%.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't taste like that, although I'm definitely feeling it. I'm gonna go with an 8.1.
8.1. All right, we're going with the 0.1 decimal points here. All right.
I did 8.5 on the.
So Ronnie needs to go
for 8.
8.1. Okay. I like your opinion, and I'm going to start calling you Copper now, I think. So that's a good nickname.
Red shirt here.
Yeah, exactly. All right, Copper. So you got, and I mean that as in the color, not as in you're like a policeman or something.
I'm the anti-vax police.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. I think that this, compared to the Rochefort, is a more drinkable beer. It went down smoother than that one. I found that the Rochefort 8 was a little bit more harsh. Mm-hmm. I couldn't picture myself having more than one in a sitting necessarily. This I could.
That's generally true these days now, though, because I'm getting old.
Yeah, but this I feel is a little bit more drinkable.
You could have 2 of these. You think?
I would. When I stood up, I noticed that I had 2 of them, but it feels like you could. Like if I was at a restaurant and somebody would go, another one, I'd be like, oh, okay. Yeah. So I think that because it's more drinkable, that generally means it's better. Like I would rate it higher. And color, dark, I just, I don't know. All I can say is I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed the drink. Was it as challenging flavor-wise? Probably not. A little bit more tame than the Rochefort too. So maybe slightly less interesting, but I think the drinkability factor offsets that. But, if I have to, judge it, I'm probably going to put it just slightly ahead of where I put that Rochefort, which means I'm probably like an 8.1 as well, because I put an 8 for the Rochefort. So I gotta go to the same place. So Let's go with these point decimal spots and how the precedent there. All right, Martin Luther. So we're coming in very close here. We're both 8.1s. Listen, I couldn't find. Somebody stole my other labels too. So these are all just too big here. But we'll throw these in.
Could put just Dave and Ronnie on that one because we graded it the same.
I could have done that, but I already wrote it down. So
all right,
we can. Here we go. Move this. Let's just do this. The Ronnie Chimay Blue 8.1. All right, so these are nearly Martin Luther approved. I don't know what's going to get the 10. We'll see if one day one happens, but we got a lot of Trappist beers to get through first. We have our call to action, so I'll talk about this part, and then I'm going to get you to do a closing prayer here. But call to action, of course, is Scribbler to Scribe is a podcast for Peace Lutheran Church, and we started this podcast because we're looking to connect with a broader community. COVID's really been a driving force in this, as the church is shut down. Now the church is opening again, but regardless of, how that's happening, I think there's still a need to connect with people in whatever way is going to work best for them. And this is a medium I think it's going to connect a lot more, especially with the, a younger audience and who maybe just aren't into the format of the traditional church service or whatever it is, right? And so we're trying to reach a broader audience. But of course, we need to support the church, and it's, the sustainability and ongoing, the church is keeping its doors open, right? So, this part of this is, we're looking, if you're able, is to support Scribbler to Scribe. If you can make a donation to what we're doing, that would be really appreciated. We're going to put details in the description to the video and to the podcast online, and you'll be able to donate to the church. Any amount makes a huge difference to what we're trying to do, and we really want to, help support our efforts to support the community, not just here in Pickering, but just worldwide. So,
and if you're still listening to this, then definitely.
Yeah, if you're here after an hour and 15 minutes, there's
no excuse.
You're going to donate. Yeah, exactly. I've come this far. I might as well give them some money.
Right. Unless you're unable to, and that's okay.
No, that's exactly.
But if you're able to, come on, guys.
Yeah, exactly. So.
Well, that was delightfully mediocre. At least the beer was good. For more Dave and Ronnie, don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your content. And if you made it this far, you're morally obligated to donate to Peace Lutheran Church at the link in the description. Pastor Ronnie Smith, I'm DW. Peace be with you.